are you guys doing? It's Monday, and I've had today off, and it's been so relaxing and refreshing, and it's just been a good day. So, yeah, I figured I would just squeeze a stream in here since I was just kind of chilling around the house, took a little nap, did some reading. It's great. Thank you for the host, Justin. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for the host, Terror. I'm sure that's going to pop up here in just a second. I appreciate it both. Hope you're doing well. I appreciate ya. So yeah, we're going to finish this book up today because why not? And so, the music seems a little loud to me. I might knock it down a little bit more. How's that? Just let me know. A little nap you were thinking might happen, and then it happened, because that's what it does. Thank you for the host, Spartan. I appreciate it. Hello again. My mother's texting me. I'm sorry. Okay. Your stream is not working? Guess my fame on Mixer shall never be accomplished. Ah, darn. Okay, Justin, thanks for popping in. Sorry your stream is not working. I hope you have a good rest of the day. And, music levels okay? Before I jump in? I'm going to say yes. Music is low, but I don't have the best earphones. Okay, I can never really tell. Like, maybe that's a little better. I did just a little smidge more. So hopefully that's a little bit better. Okay. It'd be fine. Okay, cool. All right, we're going to jump in with chapter 14. We're going to read chapters 14 to, what's the last chapter? 20. So that's 7 chapters. Because 20 minus 13 is 7. Forehead. We're going to do that. Oh, also, I want to say a quick shout out, because I've gotten many comments over the last few weeks from this person on my YouTube. So this is for M. Watts Riley. You seem to be frustrated with me sometimes, saying that I don't answer your questions and your comments. However, I try to respond to every comment that you do. So I'm not sure if you're seeing my replies to you, but when you comment, I click reply underneath your comment and I reply to your comment there. Since I don't see your comments while I'm filming this video, obviously. But I just wanted to let you know that I'm not ignoring you. I've answered your questions multiple times. I just don't know if you've actually seen those answers. So I apologize if I have frustrated you by any means of the imagination. I have not intended to do that. I just think there might be a miscommunication and you not realizing that I am responding to your comments. I'm just responding to them as comments. So there'll be text comments underneath your original comments to me. So if you want to go back and check some of the comments on the videos that you've made of mine, that's where you'll see my responses. So questions that you've asked me, such as what do I plan to study and things like that, I've answered multiple times. I just kind of wanted to let you know, because I know you watch these videos, and I didn't want you to continue being frustrated with me. So that's just what I wanted to give a shout out to you and let you know that I have been answering your questions. Hello, Rula Pena, how are you? It's good to see you. I hope you're doing good. Oh, you say you're doing great. That's great. I'm glad. Okay. And with that said, I'm going to jump into chapter 14. An urgent message. Excellent, Captain Rosalind said after Nancy had told her story. He smiled. The way you're building up clues, if you were on my force, I'd recommend a citation for you. The young sleuth smiled and thanked him. I must find my father, she said earnestly. I'll call Captain McGinnis of the River Heights force at once, the officer told her. Why don't you sit down here and wait? It shouldn't take long for them to get information from Aiken's used car lot. Nancy agreed and took a chair in a corner of the captain's office. Presently, he called to her. I have your answer, Miss Drew. She jumped up and went over to his desk. The officer told her that Captain McGinnis in River Heights had been most cooperative. He had sent 2 men at once to Aiken's used car lot. They had just returned with a report. Day before yesterday, an athletic-looking man with a crinkly ear came there and purchased a car. He showed a driver's license stating he was Samuel Greenman from Huntsville. Nancy was excited over the information. Then it'll be easy to pick him up, won't it? She asked. I'm afraid not, Captain Rosalind replied. McGinnis learned from the Huntsville police that although Greenman was supposed to live at the address he gave, he is reported to have been out of town for some time. Then no one knows where he is? Not any of his neighbors. The officer also reported that Samuel Greenman was a person of questionable character. He was wanted on a couple of robbery charges, and police in several states had been alerted to be on the lookout for him. Well, if the man I saw at my car is Samuel Greenman, then maybe he's hiding in this area. Captain Rosalind smiled. Are you going to suggest next that he is the ghost at Twin Elms? Who knows? Nancy countered. In any case, Captain Rosalind said, your idea that he may be hiding out around here is a good one. Nancy was about to ask the officer another question when his phone rang. A moment later he said, It's for you, Miss Drew. The girl detective picked up the receiver and said, Hello? The caller was Helen Corning, and her voice sounded frantic. Oh, Nancy, something dreadful has happened here. You must come home at once. What is it? Nancy cried out, but Helen had already put down the instrument at her end. Nancy told Captain Rosalind of the urgent request and said she must leave at once. Let me know if you need the police, the officer called after her. Thank you, I will. Nancy drove to Twin Elms as fast as the law allowed. As she pulled up in front of the house, she was startled to see a doctor's car there. Someone had been taken ill. Nancy met her friend at the front door. Nancy, she said in a whisper, Miss Flora may have had a heart attack. How terrible, Nancy said, shocked. Tell me all about it. Dr. Morrison wants Miss Flora to go to the hospital right away, but she refuses. She says she won't leave here. Helen said that the physician was still upstairs attending to her great-grandmother. When did she become ill? Nancy said. Did something in particular bring on the attack? Helen nodded. Yes, it was very frightening. Miss Flora, Aunt Rosemary, and I were in the kitchen talking about supper. They wanted to have a special dish to surprise you because they knew you were dreadfully upset. Well, that was sweet of them, Nancy remarked. Please go on, Helen. Miss Flora became rather tired, and Aunt Rosemary suggested she go upstairs and lie down. She'd just started up the stairway when, for some unknown reason, she turned to look back. There, in the parlor, stood a man. A caller? Nancy questioned. Oh, no, Helen replied. Miss Flora said he was an ugly, horrible-looking person. He was unshaven, and his hair was kind of long. Do you think he was the ghost? Nancy inquired. Miss Flora thought so. Well, she didn't scream. You know, she's really terribly brave. She just decided to go down and meet him herself. And then what do you think? Well, I could guess any number of things, Nancy replied. What did happen? Helen said that when Miss Turnbull had reached the parlor, no one was in it. And there was no secret door open. What did Miss Flora do then? Nancy asked. She fainted. At this moment, a tall, slender, gray-haired man carrying a physician's bag walked down the stairs to the front hall. Helen introduced Nancy to him, then asked about the patient. Well, fortunately, Miss Flora is going to be all right, said Dr. Morrison. She's an amazing woman. With complete rest and nothing more to worry her, I believe she'll be all right. In fact, she may be able to be up for short periods by this time tomorrow." "Oh, I'm so relieved," said Helen. "I'm terribly fond of my great-grandmother, and I don't want anything to happen to her." The physician smiled. "I'll do all I can, but you people will have to help." "Well, how can we do that?" Nancy asked quickly. The physician said that no one was to talk about the ghost. "Miss Flora says that she saw a man in the parlor and that he must have come in by some secret entrance. Now you know as well as I do that such a thing is not plausible." "But the man could not have entered this house any other way," Helen told him quickly. "Every window and door on this first floor is kept locked." The doctor raised his eyebrows. "You've heard of hallucinations?" he asked. Nancy and Helen frowned, but remained silent. They were sure that Miss Flora had not seen an hallucination. If she had said there was a man in the parlor, then one had been there. "Call me if you need me before tomorrow morning," the doctor said as he moved toward the front door. "Otherwise, I'll drop in sometime before 12. After the medic had left, the two girls exchanged glances. Nancy said, "Are you game to search the parlor again?" "You bet I am," Helen responded. "Shall we start now or wait till after supper?" Although Nancy was eager to begin at once, she thought that first she should go upstairs and extend her sympathy to Miss Flora. She also felt that a delay in serving her supper while the search went on might upset the ill woman. Helen offered to go into the kitchen at once and start preparing the meal. Nancy nodded and went up the stairs. Miss Flora had been put to bed in her daughter's room to avoid any further scares from the ghost, who seemed to operate in the elderly woman's own room. "Miss Flora, I'm so sorry you have to stay in bed," said Nancy, walking up and smiling at the patient.
"Well, I am too," Miss Turnbull replied. "And I think it's a lot of nonsense. Everybody faints once in a while. If you'd ever seen what I did, that horrible face."
"Mother," pleaded Aunt Rosemary, who was seated in a chair on the other side of the bed. "You know what the doctor said."
"Oh, those doctors," her mother said pettishly. "Anyway, Nancy, I'm sure I saw a ghost. Now you just look for a man who hasn't shaved in goodness knows how long and has an ugly face and kind of longish hair." It was on the tip of Nancy's tongue to ask for information on the man's height and size, but recalling the doctor's warning, she said nothing about this. Instead, she smiled, and taking one of Miss Flora's hands in her own, said, "Let's not talk any more about this until you're up and well. Then I'll put you on the Drew and Company detective squad." The amusing remark made the elderly woman smile, and she promised to try getting some rest. "But first, I want something to eat," she demanded. "Do you think you girls can manage alone? I'd like Rosemary to stay here with me."
"Of course we can manage, and we'll bring you exactly what you should have to eat." Nancy went downstairs and set up a tray for Miss Flora. On it was a cup of steaming chicken bouillon, a thin slice of well-toasted bread, and a saucer of plain gelatin. A few minutes later, Helen took another tray upstairs with more substantial meal on it for Aunt Rosemary. Then the two girls sat down in the dining room to have their own supper. After finishing it, they quickly washed and dried all the dishes, then started for the parlor. "Where do you think we should look?" Helen whispered. During the past half hour, Nancy had been going over in her mind what spot in the parlor they might have overlooked, one which could possibly have an opening behind it. She had decided on a large cabinet built into the wall. It contained a beautiful collection of figurines, souvenirs from many places, and knickknacks of various kinds. "I'm going to look for a hidden spring that may move the cabinet away from the wall," Nancy told Helen in a low voice. For the first time, she noticed that each of the figurines and knickknacks were set in small depressions on the shelves. Nancy wondered excitedly if this had been done so the figurines would not fall over in case the cabinet were moved. Eagerly, she began to look on the back wall of the interior of the cabinet for a spring. She and Helen together searched every inch of the upper part, but found no spring to move the great built-in piece of furniture. On the lower part of the cabinet were two doors which Nancy had opened many times, but then she had been looking for a large opening. Now she was hoping to locate a tiny spring or movable panel. Helen searched the left side while Nancy took the right. Suddenly, her pulse quickened in anticipation. She felt a spot slightly higher than the rest. Nancy ran her fingers back and forth across the area, which was about 1/2 an inch high and 3 inches long. It may conceal something, she thought, and pushed gently against the wood. Nancy felt a vibration in the whole cabinet. "Helen, I've found something," she whispered hoarsely. "You better stand back." Nancy pressed harder. This time the right side of the cabinet began to move forward. Nancy jumped up from her knees and stood back with Helen. Slowly, very slowly, one end of the cabinet began to move into the parlor, the other into an open space behind it. Helen grabbed Nancy's hand in fright. What were they going to find in this secret passageway? That's the end of chapter 14. It's been a hot minute since I've been here. Haven't been active on Twitch anyway. Well, it's good to see you, Rulapina. I turned off my blind message because I always forget to do that. Extra free stream! Hey, Storm. Thank you for shouting out, Storm. Had a really good day today. Beat Persona last night. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm having a really good day today, too. So twins on a good Monday. This lady just describing me. No, that's so mean. That was 14. Sorry. Whispered hoarsely, Bob. Probably like a lot of discarded KFC buckets. You think that's probably what's in the secret passageway? KFC buckets? I mean, if I was living in a secret passageway, I would probably have a lot of KFC. Okay. Even though KFC might not have existed when this came out. I don't know. I think KFC's been around a long time, but I don't know if it's before 1930. I'm gonna look this up right now. KFC founding date. Oh, 1952. Oh, okay. In North Corbin, Kentucky. So when this was rewritten, when they revised it, it was in 1956. So they could have rewritten. I'm sorry, it was 1959. So they totally could have rewritten KFC into this. Totally. It possible. Okay, let's keep going and find out if you're right or not. Chapter 15. A New Suspect. The great crystal chandelier illuminated the narrow passageway behind the cabinet. It was not very long. No one was in it, and the place was dusty and filled with cobwebs. There's probably an exit at the other end of this, said Nancy. Let's see where it goes. I think I better wait here, Nancy, Helen suggested. This old cabinet might suddenly start to close itself, and if it does, I'll yell so you can get out in time. Nancy laughed. You're a real pal, Helen. As Nancy walked along the passageway, she looked carefully at the two walls which lined it. There was no visible exit from either of the solid plastered walls. The far end, too, was solid, but this wall had been made of wood. Nancy felt it might have some significance. At the moment, she could not figure it out and started to return to the parlor. Halfway along the narrow corridor, she saw a folded piece of paper lying on the floor. This may prove something, she told herself eagerly, picking it up. Just as Nancy stepped back into the parlor, Aunt Rosemary appeared. Excuse me. Whew. She stared in astonishment at the opening in the wall and at the cabinet which now stood at right angles to it. You found something? She asked. Only this, Nancy replied, and handed Aunt Rosemary the folded paper. As the girls looked over her shoulder, Mrs. Hayes opened it. This is an unfinished letter, she commented, then started to decipher the old-fashioned handwriting. Why, this was written way back in 1785, not long after the house was built. The note read, My honorable friend Benjamin, the disloyalty of two of my servants has just come to my attention. I am afraid they plan to harm the cause of the colonies. I will have them properly punished. My good fortune in learning about this disloyalty came while I was at my listening post. Every word spoken in the servants' sitting room can be overheard by me. I will watch for further... The letter ended at this point. Instantly Helen said, Listening post? It must be the end of this passageway, Nancy guessed. Aunt Rosemary, what room would connect with it? I presume the kitchen, Mrs. Hayes replied. and it seems to me that I once heard that the present kitchen was a sitting room for the servants long ago. You recall that back in colonial days, food was never cooked in a mansion. It was always prepared in another building and brought in on great trays. Helen smiled. With a listening post, the poor servants here didn't have a chance for good chit-chat together. Their conversations were never a secret from their master. Nancy and Aunt Rosemary smiled too and nodded. Then the young sleuth said, "Let's see if the listening post still works." It was arranged that Helen would go into the kitchen and start talking. Nancy would stand at the end of the corridor to listen. Aunt Rosemary, who was shown how to work the hidden spring on the cabinet, would act as guard if the great piece of furniture suddenly started to move and close the opening. "All ready?" Helen asked. She moved out of the room. When she thought Nancy was at her post, she began to talk about her forthcoming wedding and asked Nancy to be in the bridal party. "I can hear Helen very plainly," Nancy called excitedly to Aunt Rosemary. "The listening post is as good as ever." When the test was over and the cabinet manually closed by Nancy, she and Helen and Aunt Rosemary held a whispered conversation. They all decided that the ghost knew about the passageway and had overheard plans which those in the house were making. Probably this was where the ghost disappeared after Miss Flora spotted him. "Funny that we seem to do more planning while we're in the kitchen than in any other room," Aunt Rosemary remarked. Helen said she wondered if this listening post was unique with the owner and architect of Twin Elms Mansion. "No, indeed," Aunt Rosemary told her. "Many old homes where there were servants had such places. Don't forget that our country has been involved in several wars, during which traitors and spies found it easy to get information while posing as servants." "Very clever," Helen remarked, "and I suppose a lot of the people who were caught never knew how they had been found out." "No doubt," said Aunt Rosemary. At that moment they heard Miss Flora's feeble voice calling from the bedroom and hurried up the steps to be sure she was all right. They found her smiling, but she complained that she did not like to stay alone so long. "I won't leave you again tonight, Mother," Aunt Rosemary promised. "I'm going to sleep on the couch in this room so as not to disturb you. Now try to get a little sleep." The following morning, Nancy had a phone call from Hannah Gruen, whose voice sounded very irate. "I've just heard from Mr. Baradell, the railroad lawyer, Nancy. He lost your address and phone number, so he called here. I'm furious at what he had to say. He hinted that your father might be staying away on purpose because he wasn't able to produce Willie Wharton." Nancy was angry too. "Well, that's absolutely unfair and untrue," she cried. "Well, I just wouldn't stand for it if I were you," Hannah Gruen stated flatly. "And that's only half of it." "You mean he had more to say about Dad?" Nancy questioned quickly. "No, not that," the housekeeper answered. "He was calling to say that the railroad can't hold up the bridge project any longer. If some new evidence isn't produced by Monday, the railroad will be forced to accede to the demands of Willie Wharton and all those other property owners." "Oh, that would be a great blow to Dad," said Nancy. "He wouldn't want this to happen. He's sure that the signature on that contract of sale is Willie Wharton's. All he has to do is find him and prove it." "Everything is such a mess," said Mrs. Gruen. "I was talking to the police just before I called you, and they have no leads at all to where your father might be." "Hannah, this is dreadful," said Nancy. "I don't know how, but I intend to find Dad, and quickly, too." After the conversation between herself and the housekeeper was over, Nancy walked up and down the hall as she tried to formulate a plan. Something must be done. Suddenly, Nancy went to the front door, opened it, and walked outside. She breathed deeply of the lovely morning air and headed for the rose garden. She let the full beauty of the estate sink into her consciousness before permitting herself to think further about the knotty problem before her. Long ago, Mr. Drew had taught Nancy that the best way to clear one's brain is to commune with nature for a time. Nancy went up one walk and down another, listening to the twittering of the birds and now and then the song of the meadowlark. Again she smelled deeply of the roses and the sweet wisteria which hung over a sagging arbor. 10 minutes later she returned to the house and sat down on the porch steps. Almost at once a mental image of Nathan Gomber came to her as clearly as if the man had been standing in front of her. The young sleuth's mind began to put together the various pieces of the puzzle regarding him and the railroad property. "Maybe Nathan Gomber is keeping Willie Wharton away," she said to herself. "Willie may even be a prisoner, and if Gomber is that kind of a person, maybe he engineered the abduction of my father." The very thought frightened Nancy. Leaping up, she decided to ask the police to have Nathan Gomber shadowed. I'll go down to the headquarters and talk to Captain Rossland, she decided, and I'll ask Helen to go along. The cleaning woman is here so she can help Aunt Rosemary in case of an emergency. Without explaining her real purpose in wanting to go downtown, Nancy merely asked Helen to accompany her there for some necessary marketing. The two girls drove off, and on the way to town, Nancy gave Helen full details of her latest theories about Nathan Gomber. Helen was amazed. And here he was acting so worried about your father's safety. When the girls reached police headquarters, they had to wait a few minutes to see Captain Rossland. Nancy fidgeted under the delay. Every moment seemed doubly precious now, but finally the girls were ushered inside and the officer greeted them warmly. "Another clue, Miss Drew?" he asked with a smile. Nancy told her story quickly. "I think you're on the right track," the officer stated. "I'll be very glad to get in touch with your Captain McGinnis in River Heights and relay your message. And I'll notify all the men on my force to be on the lookout for this Nathan Gomber." "Thank you," said Nancy gratefully. "Every hour that goes by, I become more and more worried about my father." "A break should come soon," the officer told her kindly. "The minute I hear anything, I'll let you know." Nancy thanked him, and the girls went on their way. It took every bit of Nancy's stamina not to show her inmost feelings. She rolled the cart through the supermarket almost automatically, picking out needed food items. Her mind would say, "We need more canned peas because the ghost took what we had." And at the meat counter she reflected, "Dad loves thick, juicy steaks." Finally, the marketing was finished, and the packages stowed in the rear of the convertible. On the way home, Nancy asked Helen what plans she had for pursuing the mystery. "To tell the truth, I've been thinking about it continuously, but so far I haven't come up with any new ideas," Nancy answered. "I'm sure, though, that something will pop up." When the girls were a little distance from the entrance to Twin Elms Estate, they saw a car suddenly pull out of the driveway and make a right turn. The driver leaned out his window and looked back. He wore a smug grin. "That's Nathan Gomber," Nancy cried out. "And did you see that smirk on his face?" Helen asked. "Oh, Nancy, maybe that means he's finally persuaded Miss Flora to sell the property to him." "Yes," Nancy replied grimly. "And also here I've just asked the police to shadow him, and I'm the first person to see him." With that, Nancy put on speed and shot ahead. As she passed the driveway to the estate, Helen asked, "Where are you going?" "I'm following Nathan Gomber until I catch him." It's the end of chapter 15. Needed to shamelessly plug KFC, I know. Colonel Sanders, the new suspect. A bucket o' chicken. It was a sneeze. Yeah, thank you. Several words. Go us. USA. USA. Dad. Well, I tried. Hey, Duck Girl, how are you? I've just read 2 chapters. I have 5 more chapters to go in the book. Yeah, 5 more. Hey, Moocher. 5 more today? I know. Hope you're doing well, Moocher and Duck Girl. Good to see you both. Thank you for the claps. Yeah, this book got 20 chapters. I just finished chapter 15. It only takes me like 10 or 15 minutes to read a chapter, though, so it's no big. Also, I gotta use my super cool bookmark. Nintendo represent. Okay. Chapter 16. Sold. "Oh, Nancy, I hope we meet a police officer," said Helen Corning. "If Gomber's a kidnapper, he may try to harm us if we catch up to him." "We'll have to be cautious," Nancy admitted. "But I'm afraid we're not going to meet any policemen. I haven't seen one on these roads in all the time I've been here." Both girls watched the car ahead of them intently. It was near enough for Nancy to be able to read the license number. She wondered if the car was registered under Gomber's name or someone else's. If it belonged to a friend of his, this fact might lead the police to another suspect. "Where do you think Gomber's going?" Helen asked presently. "To meet somebody?" "Perhaps, and he may be on his way back to River Heights." "Not yet," Helen said, for at that moment Gomber had reached a crossroads and turned sharp right. "That road leads away from River Heights." "But it does lead past Riverview Manor," Nancy replied tensely as she neared the crossroads. Turning right, the girls saw Gomber ahead, tearing along at a terrific speed. He passed the vacant mansion. A short distance beyond it, he began to turn his car lights off and on. "What's he doing that for?" Helen queried. "Is he testing his lights?" Nancy was not inclined to think so. "I believe he's signaling to someone. Look all around, Helen, see if you can spot anybody." She herself was driving so fast she did not dare take her eyes from the road. Helen gazed right and left, then turned to gaze through the back window. "I don't see a soul," she reported. Nancy began to feel uneasy. It was possible that Gomber might have been signaling to someone to follow the girls. "Helen, keep looking out the rear window and see if a car appears and starts to follow us." "Maybe we ought to give up the chase and just tell the police about Gomber," Helen said a bit fearfully. But Nancy did not want to do this. "I think it'll help us a lot to know where he's heading." She continued the pursuit and several miles farther on came to the town of Hancock. "Isn't this where that crinkly-eared fellow lives?" Helen inquired. "Yes." "Then it's my guess Gomber's going to see him." Nancy reminded her friend that the man was reported to be out of town, presumably because he was wanted by the police on a couple of robbery charges. Though Hancock was small, there was a great deal of traffic on the main street. In the center of town at an intersection there was a signal light. Gomber shot through the green, but by the time Nancy reached the spot, the light had turned red. "Oh dear," she fumed. "I'll probably lose him." In a few seconds the light changed to green and Nancy again took up her pursuit, but she felt at this point it was futile. Gomber could have turned down any of a number of side streets, or if he'd gone straight through the town, he would now be so far ahead of her that it was doubtful she could catch him. Nancy went on nevertheless for another 3 miles. Then, catching no sight of her quarry, she decided to give up the chase. "I guess it's hopeless, Helen," she said. "I'm going back to Hancock and report everything to the police there. I'll ask them to get in touch with Captain Rossland and Captain McGinnis." "Oh, I hope they capture Gomber," Helen said. "He's such a horrible man. He ought to be put in jail just for his bad manners." Smiling, Nancy turned the car and headed back for Hancock. A woman passerby gave her directions to police headquarters, and a few moments later Nancy parked in front of it. The girls went inside the building. Nancy told the officer in charge who they were, then gave him full details of the recent chase. The officer listened attentively, then said, "I'll telephone your River Heights captain first." "And please alert your own men and the state police," Nancy requested. He nodded. "Don't worry, Miss Drew, I'll follow through from here." He picked up his phone. Helen urged Nancy to leave immediately. "While you were talking, I kept thinking about Gomber's visit to Twin Elms. I have a feeling something may have happened there. You remember what a self-satisfied look Gomber had on his face when we saw him come out of the driveway?" "You're right," Nancy agreed. "We better hurry back there." It was a long drive back to Twin Elms, and the closer the girls go to it, the more worried they became. "Miss Flora's already ill," Helen said tensely, "and Gomber's visit may have made her worse." On reaching the house, the front door was opened by Aunt Rosemary, who looked pale. "I'm so glad you've returned," she said. "My mother's much worse. She's had a bad shock, and I'm waiting for Dr. Morrison." Mrs. Hayes' voice was trembling, and she found it hard to go on. Nancy said sympathetically, "We know Nathan Gomber was here. We've been chasing his car, but we lost it. Did he upset Miss Flora?" "Yes. I was out of the house about 20 minutes, talking with the gardener, and didn't happen to see Gomber drive up. The cleaning woman Lily let him in. Of course she didn't know who he was, and she thought it was all right. When she finally came outside to tell me, I had walked way over to the wisteria arbor at the far end of the grounds. In the meantime, Gomber went upstairs. He began talking to Mother about selling the mansion, and when she refused, he threatened her, saying that if she did not sign, all kinds of dreadful things would happen to me and both you girls. Poor Mother couldn't hold out any longer. At this moment, Lily, who couldn't find me, returned and went upstairs. She actually witnessed Mother's signature on the contract of sale and signed her own name to it. Gomber's won." Aunt Rosemary sank into the chair by the telephone and began to cry. Nancy and Helen put their arms around her, but before either of them could usher a word of comfort, they heard a car drive up in front of the mansion. At once, Mrs. Hayes dried her eyes and said, "It must be Dr. Morrison." Nancy opened the door and admitted the physician. The whole group went upstairs where Miss Flora lay staring at the ceiling like someone in a trance. She was murmuring, "I shouldn't have signed. I shouldn't have sold Twin Elms." Dr. Morrison took the patient's pulse and listened to her heartbeat with a stethoscope. A few moments later he said, Mrs. Turnbull, won't you please let me take you to the hospital?" "Not yet," said Miss Flora stubbornly. She smiled wanly.
I know I'm ill, but I'm not going to get better any quicker in the hospital than I am right here. I'll be moving out of Twin Elms soon enough, and I want to stay here as long as I can. Oh, why did I ever sign my name to that paper? As an expression of defeat came over the physician's face, Nancy moved to the bedside. Miss Flora, she said gently, perhaps the deal will never go through. In the first place, perhaps we can prove you signed under coercion. If that doesn't work, you know it takes a long time to have a title search made on property. By then, maybe Gomber will change his mind. I hope you're right, the elderly woman replied, squeezing Nancy's hand affectionately. The girls left the room so that Dr. Morrison could examine the patient further and prescribe for her. They decided to say nothing of their morning's adventure to Miss Flora, but at luncheon they gave Aunt Rosemary a full account. I'm almost glad you didn't catch Gomber, Mrs. Hayes exclaimed. He might have harmed you both. Nancy said she felt sure that the police of one town or the other would soon capture him, and then perhaps many things could be explained. For one, we can find out why he was turning his lights off and on. I have a hunch he was signaling to someone, and that person was hidden in Riverview Manor. You may be right, Aunt Rosemary replied. Helen suddenly leaned across the table. Do you suppose our ghost thief hides out there? I think it's very probable, Nancy answered. I'd like to do some sleuthing in that old mansion. You're not going to break in? Helen asked, horrified. Her friend smiled. No, Helen, I'm not going to evade the law. I'll go to the realtor who's handling the property and ask him to show me the place. Do you want to come along? Helen shivered a little, but said she was game. Let's do it this afternoon. Oh, dear. Aunt Rosemary gave an anxious sigh. I don't know whether or not I should let you. It sounds very dangerous to me. If the realtor is with us, we should be safe, Helen spoke up. Her aunt then gave her consent and added that the realtor, Mr. Dodd, had an office on Main Street. Conversation ceased for a few moments as the threesome finished lunch. They had just left the table when they heard a loud thump upstairs. My goodness, Aunt Rosemary cried out. I hope Mother hasn't fallen. She and the girls dashed up the stairs. Miss Flora was in bed, but she was trembling like a leaf in the wind. She pointed a thin white hand toward the ceiling. It was up in the attic. Somebody's there. That's the end of chapter 16. Represent. My super cool bookmark is a wanted poster. That's cool. Nancy said, no, I am the law. Oh, I hope she didn't lose them. Oh, you made a secret backup. Good. The country when you're in the country when the payment was a rack of eggs, some steaks, and a bottle of gin. Thank you for the claps. Realtors are so tough. Hey, Puffy. One was my ex-girlfriend, as in 7 years ago ex, and we're both married to others now. Yeah. How's it going, Puffy? Yay for marriage. I wouldn't know. I mean, I'm sure it's lovely. I'm doing good. I'm having a good day. Depends on the marriage. I suppose that's also true. All right. We got 3 more chapters, boys and girls. Or no, 4 more chapters. 4 more chapters, boys and girls. No, I don't. I don't have a spouse on the low. I don't even have a relationship on the low. You know. So on the low, she don't even know. Yeah. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
I know, feels bad, man, but it's okay. I'm just enjoying living my life, being a career woman, #manager things, enjoying friends, it's great. Yeah, and the other also doesn't know it. Doing #manager things, it's true. And sometimes it sucks. That's my life. Okay. Chapter 17, Through the Trapdoor. Let's find out who's in the attic, Nancy urged as she ran from the room, Helen at her heels. Mother, will you be all right if I leave you a few moments? Aunt Rosemary asked. I'd like to go with the girls. Of course, run along. Nancy and Helen were already on their way to the 3rd floor. They did not bother to go noiselessly, but raced up the center of the creaking stairs. Reaching the attic, they lighted 2 of the candles and looked around. They saw no one and began to look behind trunks and pieces of furniture. Nobody was hiding. And there's no evidence, said Nancy, that the alarming thump was caused by a falling box or carton. There's only one answer, Helen decided. The ghost was here, but how did he get in? The words were scarcely out of her mouth when the group heard a man's spine-chilling laugh. It had not come from downstairs. He's back of the wall, Helen gasped fearfully. Nancy agreed, but Aunt Rosemary said, that laugh could have come from the roof? Helen looked at her aunt questioningly. You mean that the ghost swings onto the roof from a tree and climbs in here somehow? I think it's very likely, her aunt replied. My father once told my mother that there's a trap door to the roof. I never saw it, and I forgot having heard of it until this minute. Holding their candles high, the girls examined every inch of the peaked-beamed ceiling. The rafters were set close together with wood panels between them. I see something that might be a trap door, Nancy called out presently from near one end of the attic. She showed the others where some short panels formed an almost perfect square. But how does it open? Helen asked. There's no knob or hook or any kind of gadget to grab hold of. It might have been removed or rusted off, Nancy said. She asked Helen to help her drag a high wooden box across the floor until it was directly under the suspected section, and Nancy stepped up onto it. Focusing her light on the 4 edges of the panels, the young sleuth finally discovered a piece of metal wedged between 2 of the planks. I think I see a way to open this, Nancy said, but I'll need some tools. I'll get the ones I found before, Helen offered. She hurried downstairs and procured them. Nancy tried one tool after another, but none would work. They were either too wide to fit into the crack, or they would not budge the piece of metal either up or down. Nancy looked at Aunt Rosemary. Do you happen to have an old-fashioned button hook? She asked. That might just be the thing for this job. Indeed I have. In fact, Mother has several of them. I'll get one. Aunt Rosemary was gone only a few minutes. Upon her return, she handed Nancy a long silver-handled button hook inscribed with Mrs. Turnbull's initials. Mother used this to fasten her high-button shoes. She has a smaller matching one for glove buttons. In olden days, she told the girl, no ladies' gloves were the pull-on type. They all had buttons. Nancy inserted the long button hook into the ceiling crack and almost at once was able to grasp the piece of metal and pull it down. Now she began tugging on it. When nothing happened, Helen climbed up on the box beside her friend and helped pull. Presently there was a groaning, rasping noise, and the square section of the ceiling began to move downward. The girls continued to yank on the metal piece, and slowly a folded ladder attached to the wood became visible. The trapdoor's up there, Helen cried gleefully, looking at the roof. Nancy, you shall have the honor of being the first one to look out. Nancy smiled. And you mean capture the ghost? As the ladder was straightened out, creaking with each pull, and set against the roof, Nancy felt sure, however, the ghost did not use it. The ladder made entirely too much noise. She also doubted that he was on the roof, but it would do no harm to look. She might pick up a clue of some sort. Well, here I go, Nancy said, and started to ascend the rungs. When she reached the top, Nancy unfastened the trap door and shoved it upward. She poked her head outdoors and looked around. No one was in sight on the roof, but in the center stood a circular wooden lookout. It occurred to Nancy that possibly the ghost might be hiding in it. She called down to Aunt Rosemary and Helen to look up at the attic ceiling for evidence of an opening into the tower. They returned to Nancy in half a minute to report they could find no sign of another trapdoor. There probably was one in the olden days, said Aunt Rosemary, but it was closed up. A sudden daring idea came to the girl detective. I'm going to crawl over to that lookout and see if anybody's in it, she told the two below. Before either of them could object, she started to crawl along the ridgepole above the wooden shingled sides of the deeply slanting roof. Helen had raced up the ladder and now watched her friend fearfully. "Be careful, Nancy," she warned. Nancy was doing just that. She must keep a perfect balance or tumble down to almost certain death. Halfway to the tower, the daring girl began to feel she had been foolhardy, but she was determined to reach her goal. "Only 5 more feet to go," Nancy told herself presently. With a sigh of relief, she reached the tower and pulled herself up. It was circular and had openings on each side. She looked in. No ghost. Nancy decided to step inside the opening and examine the floor. She set one foot down, but immediately the boards, rotted from the weather, gave way beneath her. "Well, it's a good thing I didn't put my whole weight on it," she thought thankfully. "Do you see anything?" Helen called. "Not a thing. This floor hasn't been in use for a long time." "Then the ghost did not come in by way of the roof," Helen stated. Nancy nodded in agreement. "The only places left to look are the chimneys," the young sleuth told her friend. "I'll check them." There were 4 of these, and Nancy crawled to each one in turn. She looked inside but found nothing to suggest that the ghost used any of them for entry. Balancing herself against the last chimney, Nancy surveyed the countryside around her. What a beautiful and picturesque panorama it was, she thought. Not far away was a lazy little river, whose water sparkled in the sunlight. The surrounding fields were green and sprinkled with patches of white daisies. Nancy looked down on the grounds of twin elms and tried in her mind to reconstruct the original landscaping. "That brick walk to the next property must have a lovely boxwood hedge at one time," she said to herself. Her gaze now turned to Riverview Manor. The grounds there were overgrown with weeds, and several shutters were missing from the house. Suddenly, Nancy's attention was drawn to one of the uncovered window panes. Did she see a light moving inside? It disappeared a moment later, and Nancy could not be sure. Perhaps the sun shining on the glass had created an optical illusion. Still, somebody might be in that house, the young sleuth thought. The sooner I get over there and see what I can find out, the better. If the ghost is hiding out there, maybe he uses some underground passage from one of the outbuildings on the property. She crawled cautiously back to the trap door, and together the girls closed it. Aunt Rosemary had already gone downstairs to take care of her mother. Nancy told Helen what she thought she had just seen in the neighboring mansion. "I'll change my clothes right away, then let's go see Mr. Dodd, the realtor broker for Riverview Manor." A half hour later, the 2 girls walked into the real estate office. Mr. Dodd himself was there, and Nancy asked him about looking at Riverview Manor. "I'm sorry, miss," he says, "but the house has just been sold." Nancy was stunned. She could see all her plans crumbling into nothingness. Then a thought came to her. Perhaps the new owner would not object if she looked around anyway. "Would you mind telling me, Mr. Dodd, who purchased Riverview Manor?" "Not at all," the realtor replied. "A man named Nathan Gomber." That is the end of chapter 17. Hashtag doing other things. JK, just manager things and nothing else. V has a relationship with a person named H. Otel. Honestly, Moocher. I don't think that's necessarily true, Super Rider. At least not in the experiences of like married couples that I look up to. For my parents, that's not true. Water gun sounds fun. Bye, Duck Girl. Have a great day. Be safe, Puffy. Oh, it's a quote from Simpsons I always found funny. Oh, I see. I know nothing about The Simpsons. Okay. We're nearing the end. We only have 18, 19, and 20. This is going to be a short stream. We pushing forward, though. Chapter 18, A Confession. Nancy Drew's face wore such a disappointed look that Mr. Dodd, the realtor, said kindly, "Don't take it so hard, miss. I don't think you'd be particularly interested in Riverview Manor. Excuse me. It's really not in very good condition. Besides, you'd need a pile of money to fix that place up." Without commenting on his statement, Nancy asked, "Couldn't you possibly arrange for me to see the inside of the mansion?" Mr. Dodd shook his head. "I'm afraid Mr. Gomber wouldn't like that." Nancy was reluctant to give up. Why, her father might even be a prisoner in that very house. Of course I can report my suspicion to the police, the young sleuth thought. She decided to wait until morning. Then if there was still no news of Mr. Drew, she would pass along the word to Captain Rossland. Mr. Dodd's telephone rang. As he answered it, Nancy and Helen started to leave his office, but he immediately waved them back. "The call is from Chief Rossland, Miss Drew," he said. "He phoned Twin Elms and learned you were here. He wants to see you at once." "Thank you," said Nancy, and the girls left. They hurried to police headquarters, wondering why the officer wanted to speak to Nancy. "Oh, if only it's news of Dad," she exclaimed fervently. "But why didn't he get in touch with me himself?" "I don't want to be a killjoy," Helen spoke up. "But maybe it's not about your father at all. Perhaps they've just caught Nathan Gomber." Nancy parked in front of headquarters and the two girls hurried inside the building. Captain Rossland was expecting them and they were immediately ushered into his office. Nancy introduced Helen Corning. "I won't keep you in suspense," the officer said, watching Nancy's eager face. "We've arrested Samuel Greenman." "The crinkly-eared man?" Helen asked. "That's right," Captain Rossland replied. "Thanks to your tip about the used car, Miss Drew, our men had no trouble at all locating him." The officer went on to say, however, that the prisoner refused to confess that he had had anything to do with Mr. Drew's disappearance. Furthermore, Harry, the taxi driver, we have him here, insists that he cannot positively identify Greenman as one of the passengers in his cab. We believe Harry is scared that Greenman's pals will beat him up or attack members of his family. "Harry did tell me," Nancy put in, "that his passenger had threatened harm to his family unless he forgot about all that he had seen." "That proves our theory," Captain Rossland stated with conviction. "Miss Drew, we think you can help the police." "I'd be glad to. How?" Captain Rossland smiled. "You may not know it, but you're a very persuasive young lady. I believe that you might be able to get information out of both Harry and Greenman, where we have failed." After a moment's thought, Nancy replied modestly, "I'll be happy to try, but on one condition." She grinned at the officer. "I must talk to these men alone." "Request granted," Captain Rossland smiled. He added that he and Helen would wait outside and he would have Harry brought in. "Good luck," said Helen as she and the captain left the room. A few moments later, Harry walked in alone. "Oh, hello, miss," he said to Nancy, barely raising his eyes from the floor. "Won't you sit down, Harry?" Nancy asked, indicating a chair alongside hers. "It was nice of the captain to let me talk to you." Harry seated himself but said nothing. He twisted his driver's cap nervously in his hands and kept his gaze downward. "Harry," Nancy began, "I guess your children would feel terrible if you were kidnapped." "It would cut 'em to pieces," the cabman stated emphatically. "Then you know how I feel," Nancy went on. "Not a word from my father for 2 whole days. If your children knew somebody who'd seen the person who kidnapped you, wouldn't they feel bad if the man wouldn't talk?" Harry at last raised his eyes and looked straight at Nancy. "I get you, miss. When something comes home to you, it makes all the difference in the world. You win. I can identify that scoundrel Greenman, and I will. Call the captain in." Nancy did not wait another second. She opened the door and summoned the officer. "Harry has something to tell you," Nancy said to Captain Rossland. "Yeah," said Harry. "I'm not going to hold out any longer. I admit Greenman had me scared, but he's the guy who rode in my cab, then ordered me to keep my mouth shut after that other passenger blacked out." Captain Rossland looked astounded. It was evident he could hardly believe that Nancy, in only a few minutes, had persuaded the man to talk. "And now," Nancy asked, "may I talk to your prisoner?" "I'll have you taken to his cell," the captain responded and rang for a guard. Nancy was led down a corridor past a row of cells until they came to one where the man with the crinkled ear sat on a cot. "Greenman," said the guard, "step up here. This is Miss Nancy Drew, daughter of the kidnapped man. She wants to talk to you." The prisoner shuffled forward but mumbled, "I ain't gonna answer no questions." Nancy waited until the guard had moved off, then she smiled at the prisoner. "We all make mistakes at times," she said. "We're often misled by people who urge us to do things that we shouldn't. Maybe you're afraid you'll receive the death sentence for helping to kidnap my father. But if you didn't realize the seriousness of this whole thing, the complaint against you may turn out just to be conspiracy." To Nancy's astonishment, Greenman suddenly burst out. "You got me exactly right, miss. I had almost nothing to do with taking your father away. The guy I was with, he's the old-timer. He's got a long prison record, and I haven't. Honest, miss, this is my first offense. I'll tell you the whole story. I met this guy only Monday night. He sure sold me a bill of goods. But all I did was see that your pop didn't run away. The old-timer's the one who drugged him." "Where's my father now?" Nancy interrupted. "I don't know. Honest, I don't," Greenman insisted. "Part of the plan was for somebody to follow the taxi. After a while, Mr. Drew was to be given a whiff of something. It didn't have no smell, that's why our taxi driver didn't catch on. And it didn't knock the rest of us out, 'cause you gotta put the stuff right under a fella's nose to make it work." "And the person who was following in a car and took my father away, who was he?" "I don't know," the prisoner answered, and Nancy felt that he was telling the truth. "Did you get any money for doing this?" Nancy asked him. "A little. Not as much as it was worth, especially if I have to go to prison. The guy who paid us for our work was the one in the car who took your father away." "Would you describe him?" Nancy requested. "Sure. Hope the police catch him soon. He's in his early 50s. He's short, he's heavy-set, he's pale, kind of watery blue eyes." Nancy asked the prisoner if he would dictate the same confession for the police, and the man nodded. "I'm awful sorry I caused all this worry, miss. I hope you find your father soon, and I wish I could help you more. I guess I am a coward. I'm too scared to tell the name of the guy who talked me into this whole thing. He's really a bad actor. No telling what happened to me if I gave his name." The young sleuth felt that she'd obtained all the information she possibly could from the man. She went back to Captain Rossland, who for the second time was amazed by the girl's success. He called a stenographer. Then he said goodbye to Nancy and Helen and went off toward Greenman's cell. On the way back to Twin Elms, Helen congratulated her friend. Now that one of the kidnappers has been caught, I'm sure that your father will be found soon, Nancy. Who do you suppose the man was who took your father from Greenman and his friend?" Nancy looked puzzled and then answered, "We know from his description that he wasn't Gomber. But Helen, a hunch of mine is growing stronger all the time that he's back of this whole thing. And putting two and two together, I believe it was Willie Wharton who drove that car. And I also believe Wharton's the one who's been playing ghost, using masks at times, like the gorilla and the unshaven long-haired man. Somehow he gets into the mansion and listens to conversations. He heard that I was going to be asked to solve the mystery at Twin Elms and told Gomber. That's why Gomber came to our home and tried to keep me from coming here by saying I should stick close to Dad." "That's right," said Helen. "And when he found that didn't work, he had Willie and Greenman and that other man kidnap your dad. He figured it would surely get you away from Twin Elms. He wanted to scare Miss Flora into selling the property, and he thought if you were around, you might dissuade her." "But in that I didn't succeed," said Nancy a bit forlornly. "Besides, they knew Dad could stop those greedy landowners from forcing the railroad to pay them more for their property. That's why I'm sure Gomber and Wharton won't release him until after they get what they want." Helen laid a hand on Nancy's shoulder. "I'm so terribly sorry about this. What can we do next?" "Somehow, I have a feeling, Helen," her friend replied, "that you and I are going to find Willie Wharton before very long. And if we do, and I find out he really signed that contract of sale, I want certain people to be around." "Who?" Helen asked, puzzled. "Mr. Barradale, the lawyer, and Mr. Watson, the notary public." The young sleuth put her thought into action. Knowing that Monday was the deadline set by the railroad, she determined to do her utmost before that time to solve the complicated mystery. But back at Twin Elms, Nancy went to the telephone and put in a call to Mr. Barradale's office. She did not dare mention Gomber or Willie Wharton's name for fear one of the other might be listening. She merely asked the young lawyer if he could possibly come to Cliffwood and bring with him whatever he felt was necessary for him to win his case. "I think I understand what you mean to say," he replied, "and I take it you cannot talk freely. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Then I'll ask the questions. You want me to come to the address you gave us the other day?" "Yes, about noon." "And you'd like me to bring along the contract of sale with Willie Wharton's signature?" "Yes, that'll be fine." Nancy thanked him and hung up. Turning from the telephone, she went to find Helen and said, "There's still lots of daylight. Even though we can't get inside Riverview Manor, we can hunt through the outbuildings over there for the entrance to an underground passage to this house." "All right," her friend agreed, "but this time you do the searching. I'll be the lookout." Nancy chose the old smokehouse of Riverview Manor first, since this was the closest to the Twin Elms property line. It yielded no clue, and she moved on to the carriage house. But neither in this building nor any of the others did the girl detective find any indication of entrances to an underground passageway. Finally, she gave up and rejoined Helen. "If there is an opening, it must be from inside Riverview Manor," Nancy stated. "Oh, Helen, it's exasperating not to be able to get in there." "I wouldn't go in there now at any case," Helen remarked. "It's way past supper time, and I'm starved, and pretty soon it'll be dark." The girls returned to Twin Elms and ate supper. A short time later, someone banged the front door knocker. Both girls went to the door. They were amazed to find that the caller was Mr. Dodd, the realtor. He held out a large brass key toward Nancy. "What's this for?" she asked, mystified. Mr. Dodd smiled. "It's the front door key to Riverview Manor. I've decided you can look around the mansion tomorrow morning, all you please." End of chapter 18. It's a good quote. Rare I see a reference to it beyond the first 10 seasons. Hey, Celeste. Hey, Disney. Thank you for shouting out Disney. Almost nothing to do with something. Well, he's free to go. They're bad cops if they haven't tried that tactic. In Nancy Drew World, Nancy is the smartest and the bestest always. Gomber equals goober. Mr. Goober. Giving up. Finally, she's doing something I can relate to. Supper time. Supper time. It's true. Was that a long chapter? I think it was only 10 pages. I think you came in like almost immediately after I started that chapter. So that might be why it felt so long. Bum, bum. Pappy's little puppy loves everyone because it's supper. Super duper supper. Supper. Super pepper upper. Supper. Super duper supper time. If Disney is showing his love of books and Nancy Drew with that claim. So much love! Okay, we have 2 more chapters and we're done with the whole book. It is, how many pages? Less than 20. It's about 17 pages. Here we go. Chapter 19, The Hidden Staircase. Seeing the look of delight on Nancy's face, Mr. Dodd laughed. "Do you think this house is haunted as well as this one?" he asked. "I hear you like to solve mysteries." "Yes, I do." Not wishing to reveal her real purpose to the realtor, the young sleuth also laughed. "Do you think I might find a ghost over there?" she counted. "Well, I never saw one, but you can never tell," the man responded with a chuckle. He said he would leave the key with Nancy until Saturday evening and then pick it up. "If Mr. Gomber should show up in the meantime, I have a key to the kitchen door he can use." Nancy thanked Mr. Dodd and with a grin said she would let him know if she found a ghost in Riverview Manor. She could hardly wait for the next morning to arrive. Miss Flora was not told of the girls' plan to visit the neighboring house. Immediately after breakfast, they set off for Riverview Manor. Aunt Rosemary went with them to the back door and wished the two good luck. "Promise me you won't take any chances," she begged. "Promise," they said in unison. With flashlights in their skirt pockets, Nancy and Helen hurried through the garden and into the grounds of Riverview Manor Estate. As they approached the front porch, Helen showed signs of nervousness. "Nancy, what will we do if we meet the ghost?" she asked. "Just tell him we found him out," her friend answered determinedly. Helen said no more and watched as Nancy inserted the enormous brass key in the lock. It turned easily, and the girls let themselves into the hall. Architecturally, it was the same as Twin Elms Mansion, but how different it looked now. The blinds were closed, lending an eerie atmosphere to the dusky interior. Dust lay everywhere, and cobwebs festooned the corners of the ceilings and spindles of the staircase. "It certainly doesn't look as if anybody lives here," Helen remarked. "Where should we start hunting?" "I want to take a look in the kitchen," said Nancy. When they walked into it, Helen gasped. "I guess I was wrong. Someone has been eating here." Eggshells, several empty milk bottles, some chicken bones, and pieces of wax paper cluttered the sink. Nancy, realizing that Helen was very uneasy, whispered to her with a giggle, "If the ghost lives here, he has a good appetite." The young sleuth took out her flashlight and beamed it around the floors and walls of the kitchen. There was no sign of a secret opening. As she went from room to room on the first floor, Helen followed, and together they searched every inch of the place for a clue to a concealed door. At last they came to the conclusion there was none. "You know it could be in the cellar," Nancy suggested. "Well, you're not going down there," Helen said firmly. "That is not without a policeman. It's too dangerous. As for myself, I want to live to get married and not to be hit over the head in the dark by that ghost so Jim won't have a bride." Nancy laughed. "You win, but I'll tell you why. At the moment, I'm more interested in finding my father than in hunting for a secret passageway. He may be a prisoner in one of the rooms upstairs, and I'm going to find out." The door to the back stairway was unlocked, and the one at the top stood open. Nancy asked Helen to stand at the foot of the main staircase while she herself went up the back steps. "If that ghost is up there and tries to escape, he won't be able to slip out that way," she explained. Helen took her post in the front hall, and Nancy crept up the back steps. No one tried to come down either stairs. Helen now went to the second floor, and together she and Nancy began a search of the rooms. They found nothing suspicious. Mr. Drew was not there. There was no sign of a ghost. None of the walls revealed a possible secret opening. But the bedroom, which corresponded to Miss Flores, had a clothes closet built in at the end next to the fireplace. "In colonial times, closets were a rarity," Nancy remarked to Helen. "I wonder if this closet was added at that time and has any special significance." Quickly, she opened one of the large double doors and looked inside. The rear wall was formed of two very wide wooden planks. In the center was a round knob sunk into the wood. "Well, this is strange," Nancy remarked excitedly. She pulled on the knob, but the wall did not move. Next, she pushed on the knob hard, leaning her full weight against the panel. Suddenly, the wall pushed inward. Nancy lost her balance and disappeared into a gaping hole below. Helen screamed, "Nancy!" Trembling with fright, Helen stepped into the closet and beamed her flashlight below. She could see a long flight of stone steps. "Nancy! Nancy!" Helen called down. A muffled answer came from below. Helen's heart gave a leap of relief. "Oh, Nancy's alive," she told herself, then called, "Where are you?" "I found the secret passageway," came faintly to Helen's ears. "Come on down." Helen did not hesitate. She wanted to be certain that Nancy was all right. Just as she started down the steps, the door began to close. Helen, in a panic that the girls might be trapped in some subterranean passageway, made a wild grab for the door. Holding it ajar, she removed the sweater she was wearing and wedged it into the opening. Finding a rail on one side of the stone steps, Helen grasped it and hurried below. Nancy arose from the dank earthen floor to meet her. "Are you sure you're all right?" Helen asked solicitously. "I admit I got a good bang," Nancy replied, "but I feel fine now. Let's see where this passageway goes." The flashlight had been thrown from her hand, but with the aid of Helen's light she soon found it. Fortunately, it had not been damaged, and she turned it on. The passageway was very narrow and barely high enough for the girls to walk without bending over. The sides were built of crumbling brick and stone. "This may tumble on us at any moment," Helen said worriedly. "Oh, I don't believe so," Nancy answered. "It must have been here for a long time." The subterranean corridor was unpleasantly damp and had an earthy smell. Moisture clung to the walls. They felt clammy and repulsive to the touch. Presently, the passageway began to twist and turn as if its builders had found obstructions too difficult to dig through. "Where do you think this leads?" Helen whispered. "I don't know. I only hope we're not going in circles." Presently, the girls reached another set of stone steps, not unlike the ones down which Nancy had tumbled, but these had solid stone sides. By their lights, the girls could see a door at the top with a heavy wooden bar across it. "Should we go up?" Helen asked. Nancy was undecided what to do. The tunnel did not end here but yawned ahead in blackness. Should they follow it before trying to find out what was at the top of the stairs? She voiced her thoughts aloud, but Helen urged that they climb the stairs. "I'll be frank with you, I'd like to get out of here." Nancy acceded to her friend's wish and led the way up the steps. Suddenly, both girls froze in their tracks. A man's voice from the far end of the tunnel commanded, "Stop! You can't go up there!" That's the end of chapter 19. So quick-witted. I hear you like to solve mysteries. That's like the level of detective that Batman had in Justice League when he said things like, "I hear you run really fast," to Flash. Sounds like a clean place. Thank you for the host, Feener. How are you today? I got a whole cellar full of popsicles, full of popsicles. Gosh! Autocorrect is the worst. Twinning. Well, Nancy gone forever. She has more lives than Wile E. Coyote and gets hit on the head about just as much. Oh, goodness, Terror. About your CW Nancy. The music matched some kind of Looney Tunes before it changed to this. Thank you for the claps. We have one more chapter to go, and then we're done for the day. Final chapter of the Hidden Staircase. They're about to wrap everything up in like 10 pages. Settle on in. How does the mystery get wrapped up? No, Disney. Chapter 20. Nancy's Victory. Their initial fright over, both girls turned and beamed their flashlights toward the foot of the stone stairway. Below them stood a short, unshaven, pudgy man with watery blue eyes. "You're the ghost," Helen stammered. "And you're Mr. Willie Wharton," Nancy added. Astounded, the man blinked in the glaring lights, then said, "Yes, I am, but how'd you know?" "You live in the old Riverview Manor," Helen went on. "You've been stealing food and silver and jewelry from Twin Elms." No, I'm not a thief," Willie Wharton cried out. "I took some food, and I've been trying to scare the old ladies so they'd sell their property. Sometimes I wore false faces, but I never took any jewelry or silver. Honest, I didn't. It must have been Gomber." Helen and Nancy were amazed. Willie Wharton, with little urging from them, was confessing more than they dared to hope. "Did you know that Nathan Gomber is a thief?" Nancy asked the man. Wharton shook his head. "I know he's sharp. That's why he was going to get me more money for my property from the railroad." "Mr. Wharton, did you sign the original contract of sale?" Nancy queried. "Yes, I did, but Mr. Gomber said if I disappeared for a while, he'd fix everything up so I'd get more money. He said he had a couple of other jobs which I could help him with. One of them was coming here to play ghost. It was a good place to disappear to, but I wish I'd never seen Nathan Gomber or Riverview Manor or Twin Elms or anything to do with ghosts." "I'm glad to hear you say that," said Nancy. Then suddenly she asked, "Where's my father?" Willie Wharton shifted his weight and looked about wildly. I don't know, really, I don't." "But you kidnapped him, in your car," the young sleuth prodded him. "We have a description of you from the taxi man." Several seconds went by before Willie Wharton answered. "I didn't know it was a kidnapping. Mr. Gomber said your father was ill and that he was going to take him to a special doctor. He said Mr. Drew was coming on a train from Chicago and was going to meet Mr. Gomber on the road halfway between here and the station. But Gomber said he couldn't meet him. He had other business to attend to, so I was to follow your father's taxi and bring him to Riverview Manor." Yes, go on," Nancy urged as Willie Wharton stopped speaking and covered his face with his hands. "I didn't expect your father to be unconscious when I picked him up," Wharton went on. "Well, those men in the taxi put Mr. Drew in the back of my car, and I brought him here. Mr. Gomber drove up from the other direction and said he would take over. He told me to come right here to Twin Elms and do some ghosting." "And you have no idea where Mr. Gomber took my father?" Nancy asked with a sinking feeling. "Nope." In a few words, she pointed out Nathan Gomber's real character to Willie Wharton, hoping that if the man before her did know anything about Mr. Drew's whereabouts, which he was not telling, that he would confess. But from Wharton's emphatic answers and sincere offers to be of all the help he could in finding the missing lawyer, Nancy concluded that Wharton was not withholding any information. "How did you find out about this passageway and the secret staircases?" Nancy questioned him. "Gomber found an old notebook under a heap of rubbish in the attic of Riverview Manor," Wharton answered. "He said it told everything about the secret entrances to the two houses. The passageways, with openings on each floor, were built when the houses were. They were used by the original Turnbulls in bad weather to get from one building to the other. This stairway was for the servants. The other two stairways were for the family. One of these led to Mr. Turnbull's bedroom in this house. The notebook also said that he often secretly entertained government agents, and sometimes he had to hurry them out of the parlor and hide them in the passageway when callers came. "Where does this stairway lead?" Helen spoke up. "To the attic of Twin Elms." Willie Wharton gave a little chuckle. "I know, Miss Drew, that you almost found the entrance, but the guys that built the place were pretty clever. Every opening has heavy double doors. When you poked that screwdriver through the crack, you thought you were hitting another wall, but really it was a door. Did you play the violin and turn on the radio and make that thumping noise in the attic? And were you the one who laughed when we were up there?" "Yes, and I moved the sofa to scare you, and I even knew about the listening post. That's how I found out all your plans and could report them to Mr. Gomber." Suddenly it occurred to Nancy that Nathan Gomber might appear on the scene at any moment. She must get Willie Wharton away and have him swear to his signature before he changed his mind. "Mr. Wharton, would you please go ahead of us up this stairway and open the doors?" she asked. "And go into Twin Elms with us and talk to Mrs. Turnbull and Mrs. Hayes. I want you to tell them that you've been playing ghost but aren't going to any longer. Miss Flora's been so frightened she's ill and in bed." "I'm sorry about that," Willie Wharton replied. "I'll go with you. I never want to see Nathan Gomber again." He went ahead of the girls and took down the heavy wooden bar from across the door. He swung it wide, pulled a metal ring in the back of the adjoining door, then quickly stepped downward. The narrow panel opening which Nancy had suspected of leading to the secret stairway now was pulled inward. There was barely room alongside it to go up the top steps and into the attic. To keep Gomber from becoming suspicious if he should arrive, Nancy asked Willie Wharton to close the secret door again. "Helen," said Nancy, "will you please run downstairs ahead of Mr. Wharton and me and tell Miss Flora and Aunt Rosemary the good news?" She gave Helen a 3-minute start, then she and Willie Wharton followed. The amazed women were delighted to have the mystery solved, but there was no time for celebration. "Mr. Baradell is downstairs to see you, Nancy," Aunt Rosemary announced. Nancy turned to Willie Wharton. "Will you come down with me, please?" She introduced both herself and the missing property owner to Mr. Baradell, then went on. "Mr. Wharton says the signature on the contract of sale is his own." "And you'll swear to that?" the lawyer asked, turning to Willie. "I sure will. I don't want anything more to do with this underhanded business," Willie Wharton declared. "I know where I can find a notary public right away," Nancy spoke up. "Do you want me to phone him, Mr. Baradell?" she asked. "Please do, at once." Nancy dashed to the telephone and dialed the number of Albert Watson on Tuttle Road. When he answered, she told him the urgency of the situation and he promised to come over at once. Mr. Watson arrived within 5 minutes with his notary equipment. Mr. Baradell showed him the contract of sale containing Willie Wharton's name and signature. Attached to it was the certificate of acknowledgement. Mr. Watson asked Willie Wharton to raise his right hand and swear he was the person named in the contract of sale. After this was done, the notary public filled in the proper places on the certificate, signed it, stamped the paper, and affixed his seal. "Well, this is really a wonderful job, Miss Drew," Mr. Baradell praised her. Nancy smiled, but her happiness at having accomplished a task for her father was dampened by the fact that she still did not know where he was. Mr. Baradell and Willie Wharton were also extremely concerned. "I'm going to call Captain Rosslyn and ask him to send some police out here at once," Nancy stated. "What better place for Mr. Gomber to hide my father than somewhere along that passageway?" "How far does it go, Mr. Wharton?" "Mr. Gomber says it goes all the way to the river, but the end of it is completely stoned up now. I never went any farther than the stairways." The young lawyer thought Nancy's idea a good one because if Nathan Gomber should return to Riverview Manor and find that Willie was gone, he would try to escape. The police promised to come at once. Nancy had just finished talking with Captain Rosslyn when Helen Corning called from the second floor. "Nancy, can you come up here? Miss Flora insists on seeing the hidden staircase." The young sleuth decided that she would just about have time to do this before the arrival of the police. Excusing herself to Mr. Baradell, she ran up the stairs. Aunt Rosemary had put on a rose-colored dressing gown while attending her mother. To Nancy's amazement, Mrs. Turnbull was fully dressed and wore a white blouse with a high collar and a black skirt. Nancy and Helen led the way to the attic. There, the girl detective, crouching on her knees, opened a secret door. "And all these years I never knew it was here," Miss Flora exclaimed. "And I doubt that my father did, or he would have mentioned it," Aunt Rosemary added. Nancy closed the secret door and they all went downstairs. She could hear the front doorbell ringing and assumed it was the police. She and Helen hurried below. Captain Rossland and another officer stood there. They said other men had surrounded Riverview Manor, hoping to catch Nathan Gomber if he did arrive there. With Willie Wharton leading the way, the girls, Mr. Barradell, and the police trooped to the attic and went down the hidden staircase to the dank passageway below. I have a hunch from reading about old passageways that there may be one or more rooms off this tunnel, Nancy told Captain Rossland. There were so many powerful flashlights in play now that the place was almost as bright as daylight. As the group moved along, they suddenly came to a short stairway. Willie Wharton explained that this led to an opening back of the sofa in the parlor. There was still another stone stairway which went up to Miss Flora's bedroom with an opening alongside the fireplace. The searchers went on. Nancy, who was ahead of the others, discovered a padlocked iron door in the wall. Was it a dungeon? She had heard of such places being used for prisoners in colonial times. By this time, Captain Rossland had caught up to her. "Do you think your father may be in here?" he asked. "I'm terribly afraid so," said Nancy, shivering at the thought of what she might find. The officer found that the lock was very rusty. Pulling from his pocket a penknife with various tool attachments, he soon had the door unlocked and flung it wide. He beamed his light into the blackness beyond. It was indeed a room without windows. Suddenly Nancy cried out, "Dad!" and sprang ahead. Lying on blankets on the floor and covered with others was Mr. Drew. He was murmuring faintly. "He's alive!" Nancy exclaimed, kneeling down to pat his face and kiss him. "He's been drugged," Captain Rossland observed. "I'd say Nathan Gomber has been giving your father just enough food to keep him alive and mixing sleeping powders in with it." From his trousers pocket, the officer brought out a small vial of restorative and held it to Mr. Drew's nose. In a few moments, the lawyer shook his head. A few seconds later, he opened his eyes. "Keep talking to your dad," the captain ordered Nancy. "Dad, wake up. You're all right. We've rescued you." Within a very short time, Mr. Drew realized that his daughter was kneeling beside him. Reaching out his arms from beneath the blankets, he tried to hug her. "We'll take him upstairs," said Captain Rossland. "Willie, open that secret entrance to the parlor." "Glad to be of help." Wharton hurried ahead and up the short flight of steps. In the meantime, the other three men lifted Mr. Drew and carried him along the passageway. By the time they reached the stairway, Willie Wharton had opened the secret door behind the sofa in the parlor. Mr. Drew was placed on the couch. He blinked, looked around, and then said in astonishment, "Willie Wharton, how did you get here? Nancy? Tell me the whole story." The lawyer's robust health and sturdy constitution had stood him in good stead. He recovered with amazing rapidity from his ordeal and listened in rapt attention as one after another of those in the room related the events of the past few days. As the story ended, there was a knock on the front door and another police officer was admitted. He had come to report to Captain Rossland that not only had Nathan Gomber been captured outside of Riverview Manor and all the loot recovered, but also that the final member of the group who had abducted Mr. Drew had been taken into custody. Gomber had admitted everything, even to having attempted to injure Nancy and her father with the truck at the River Heights Bridge project. He had tried to frighten Miss Flora into selling Twin Elms because he had planned to start a housing project on the 2 Turnbull properties. "It's a real victory for you," Nancy's father praised his daughter proudly. The young sleuth smiled. Although she was glad it was all over, she could not help but look forward to another mystery to solve. One soon came her way when, quite accidentally, she found herself involved in the bungalow mystery. Miss Flora and Aunt Rosemary had come downstairs to meet Mr. Drew. While they were talking to him, the police officer left, taking Willie Wharton with him as a prisoner. Mr. Baradell also said goodbye. Nancy and Helen slipped out of the room and went to the kitchen. "We'll prepare a super-duper lunch to celebrate the occasion," said Helen happily. "And we can make all the plans we want," Nancy replied with a grin. "There won't be anyone at the listening post." That's the end of chapter 20 and the end of the book. Sorry I got interrupted. My mother called me and she knew I was streaming, so I thought maybe something had gone wrong and I wanted to double check it. When Disney reads it on his stream tomorrow. Mr. Willy Wonka. Enjoy dinner. I know you're already gone, but you got me there. I was the guy who planned the bank heist. I thought it was the right way, but you showed me it was a wrong thing to do. Legit. There's a hidden staircase in this book? Is Willie Warden Willy Wonka's brother? It's terrible. Willie Warden runs a super whimsical prison. Yeah, that's really funny. I can see it now. There's like singing guards, and every time that somebody gets thrown into prison, they sing a song about that guy, like the Oompa Loompas do. Thank you for shouting out HS. The nonsensical noises did not work for me. Got off work, I'm hot and sweaty. Ugh. Hope you can take a cool shower and relax. Thank you for the welcome back. The bungalow mystery. Oh, hey, James. How's it going? Yeah, I'm about to wrap up, but I appreciate it. Thank you for shouting out, James. How's your shiny hunting been going? V-Mom needed an update on Animal Crossing. No, it wasn't that. She was checking in on something else. Oompa Loompa Dockety Blurter. This man away. This man got locked away for murder. That's terrible. But also hilarious. Alright, everybody. That's the end of that book. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next book that we'll be reading is probably going to be the second Wayside book. But I don't know how quickly that's going to be. So, I hope that you all have a great rest of the day. I'm making notes so that I remember where I'm at. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, a great Monday. Finishing up for those of y'all who are in the end here. I hope that it's a kickoff to a good week for you. And I hope to see you again soon. I plan to stream tomorrow after I get off of work tomorrow. I was going to stream this tomorrow, but I'll do some more Pokemon Omicron tomorrow. So hopefully I'll see you then. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. Stay healthy. And I'll see you soon. Bye.